and welcome to my channel. Today we're making a reversible costume. On one side it's the blue dress that Ariel wears in The Little Mermaid. On the other side it's the peasant dress that Aurora wears in Sleeping Beauty. Now I've been meaning to make this for about 3 years. I've had the idea in my head for a while because the corsets on both the dresses look very similar. They're basically the same, and the silhouette of the outfits pretty much also the same, so I thought this could easily be reversible. So I decided to make it for my friend Freddie for her birthday as a test run, and if it goes well, which it did, I would consider selling them. So I'm considering selling them, so if anyone wants one, let me know. Also, I'm thinking of putting this in a blog post, my step-by-step how I did it, just so it'll be a little bit easier to follow if anyone wants to do it. Is it bad business to tell people how to do something you're selling? I don't know. I might not even sell it. I just came up with the idea, I made it, it's cool, I want to show it. Probably going to split this into 2 parts because I have over an hour and a half of footage and I'm trying to edit it down, but it's not working. In other news, broke my foot. Half of this video is cat. Can you see the cat? Or am I stroking imaginary airspace? Okay. Hello, darling. I'm fine. So I started making this in the summertime and I finished it 2 weeks ago. Wow, I've really been procrastinating making this video. It took me quite a long time to make this because I was really busy with work around Christmas, so I didn't work on it at all around then. So let us get into the tutorial. So first I started with sketching out my ideas, what it was going to look like, the proportions, how I was going to actually make this reversible and make it work. So I also needed to think about the shapes of each piece, my pattern shapes, any details I was going to add, and then also what my corset was going to look like, because that would be the most technical piece, and how that was going to work and what the sleeves would look like. And then all I needed to do is collect the measurements and I could begin. So to start I needed to make a basic block because I'd need that to make my corset patterns and my patterns for the top half of the dress. Now I used the basic block instructions from Stays and Corsets by Mandy Barrington. She was actually one of my tutors in uni, which is how I found out about this book. Really? Now if you don't know what a basic block is, I recommend you Google it because I'm terrible at explaining. But you use the measurements from your model and you follow the instructions and it makes a very basic sort of t-shirt shape for your person, and you can use it to adapt into most patterns, any pattern really, and it includes darts and everything, but it's very mathematical, so you've got to do a lot of adding. So this is the corset pattern I'll be using. It is the 1890 wasp waist corset, and this is what the pattern looks like. So that's the pattern all laid out, and that's the line drawing of it. Yeah, anyway, these are the instructions I'll be following to make the corset. Yeah, so that's what I'll be making, but of course I won't have a busk, I have the ribbing, I won't have as many bone channels, and it's going to be a different shape. I chose this pattern because it's a similar silhouette and it comes down further at the front and it goes up higher at the top. So what I did is I traced my basic block pattern so I still had that to use later, and I used the traced version for the corset pattern. So here is my finished corset pattern. The original corset pattern is in the blue lines, and the adaptations I made to make it look like the Ariel / Aurora pattern are in the red lines. I have no idea if this is actually making sense because a lot of people struggle with looking at flat patterns as opposed to what they'd look like 3D on a body. So you know what? I think I'm going to animate this to make it a little bit easier. First of all, quick apology for my drawing skills. I know. Second of all, this is roughly what a human torso looks like. Now, when I add these blue lines, this is what the corset pattern we're using looks like. And now you can see this is what the corset we're trying to make looks like. So we're going to need to do some minor adaptations. Now if you look at what the black lines I've just drawn, this is what the new pattern looks like, bearing in mind all these lines are really rough. So what I've done is I've raised the bust line so it's a bit higher, because historical corsets, they sit very low, and that's not decent for nowadays purposes because it's going to be on show. I'm also raising up at the waistline so it ends on the waist and not the hips, and I'm making that V in the front, both on the top and the bottom, to match the picture. I'm also going to put some extra support in the side, as I'm only using boning on the seams, but on that side piece there's going to be extra strain, so I'm going to put some boning there. So now I'm tracing my patterns and cutting them out of coutil. Now coutil, if I'm pronouncing that right, is usually used for corset making because it's quite thick, quite strong, and it has absolutely no stretch, which will hold you in and keep the shape, which is what you want with a corset. I'm using 2.5 centimeter seam allowance because that's what you usually do with costumes. So I can also do fell seams to put the bone channels in. Now I'm cutting out 2 of each pattern piece because of course there's 2 sides of the corset, but in the side piece I'm cutting 4 because they're going back to back, because that's where the extra strain in the garment is. I'm also doing 5 centimeters of seam allowance at the top and bottom of the garment, just in case I need to raise it or lower it.
I'm cutting out the other side pieces of the corset, and guess who's lying on all the pieces I need? 'Tis you, Wolfie. Yeah, you just get comfortable on all my corset pieces. You do that. You enjoy your spot.
And here are all my many pieces of coutil all cut out and ready to go. I've numbered each piece so I don't forget which one's which and accidentally sew them in the wrong place. Highly suggest you don't do that. If you remember, I cut out both sides of the pattern piece at the same time to save time. Now this means one side won't have the markings on, and we don't want to pin on our pattern again and go around it, that's too much effort. So I'm using some carbon paper and a wheelie cutter, and I'm just marking those things on to the other piece. Fabulous.
Okay, so for each piece I've tacked on the chalk lines so you can see them on both sides, and I've labelled each piece from 1 to 7, so you know which one it is, with 2 of each pieces flipped, so one's the left side and one's the right side. Yeah, now I'm going to pin the pieces together with the wrong sides facing each other, so these pieces don't go together, but these are the right sides of the fabric, and I'd be pinning them like this, and then sewing, because I'm going to be doing fell seams, which would fold over and become bone channels like that. Also on my centerpiece, which is here, I've marked out a bone channel to go across and 2 bone channels to go down the center. I'm going to sew in those bone channels because this is 2 pieces together, all the others are single pieces. I'm going to stitch in those bone channels. Right.
Now, did all that make sense? I'm hoping it made sense. If not, feel free to ask me a question in the comments. I'll answer anything. If that did make sense, brilliant. You have a wonderful piece of footage of my machine working. For once, it's not broken. Now, if you need any more information about anything I talk about, e.g. fell seams, highly suggest Googling it. Google can be very helpful, and if not, just let me know and I can give you some links to some helpful things. Also, I forgot to mention, the centre front, there's going to be 2 bones on the centre front because there's 2 pattern pieces, but I'm not doing fell seams on the outside. I'm going to put them on the inside because I don't want them to be as chunky and as visible, because that's going to be straight against the skin and I don't want it to get in the way. So they will be on the inside. Maybe I'll slip stitch them, I haven't decided yet. We shall see.
Okay, so I've sewn all the pieces together. I used fell seams, which then made bone channels. I inserted the bones. So for boning, I use zip ties because they're way cheaper and they're easy to cut down, and they're usually the same length. So they're all sewn together. I've put a bone in the end Then I'm going to folding over the raw edge. I'm going to leave 1.5 centimeters for eyelets, and then put another boning channel in, which should take me to the edge of the seam allowance, and that will do the back closures. And then I shall get back to you. Also, I tacked a new line along the top line because it wasn't as straight as it looked in the pattern, so now I've straightened it out, and also this looked very low, and in the pictures it kind of goes straight across. I didn't want it to go straight across because it wouldn't fit very well, so I've kind of gone with the pattern lines. So yeah, also in the centre front on the back I would have sewn a bone channel, but I didn't want the stitching lines to be visible, so I kind of wrapped around a bone and hand stitched it down on one side. I haven't done the other side yet, but that's what I've done so far, and I shall keep sewing. So I sewed this line and the tension's out, so it's a bit wobbly, so I want to unpick it, right, and I guess my unpicker is sharper than I thought, because it made a slash right through there. I don't know how that happened, so it's just my unpicker, but it must be sharp. I did not think unpickers were that sharp, so yeah, I'm going to have to unpick the false seams and recut out this piece and resew and rebone it, which I really don't want to have to do, but I'm going to have to do because I can't have a hole in the corset, so that's going to be fun. Next we're going to have to cut some bias strips to bind the edges of the fabric because we don't want any loose edges fraying. If you don't know what bias binding is, I am going to explain. So a woven fabric, you know, is woven like this, and here's the straight of grain, right, and it doesn't stretch, so it won't wrap around the corners easily. But if you cut it diagonally through what's known as the bias, and when things are cut on the bias, they have a natural bend and stretch to them. For example, here's a piece of bias I've just cut. Now it bends nicely round the corners like this without puckering, and it stretches, which is what we want to go over the curves of the corset. So what you want to do is measure how thick you want your bias bound edge. Now I've done mine as 1 centimeter. You could do less or more than that, but that's what I'm going with. I'm going to go with 4 times, or if you're going really big, you want to do 2 times seam allowance and then double what you want to do. But because mine's just 1 centimeter, I'm going 4 times, so that's 4 centimeters wide. And what you want to do is fold it in half, iron it, and then fold the edges under and iron that flat to make the binding, and then it can encase the corset in there. So ironing. So I've just done this load of binding for the top of the corset, and I'm about to do some with the bottom of the corset, but my iron is leaking water everywhere. I don't know why, it's just doing that. It's probably broken. Don't try this at home. Don't recommend using leaking irons because water and electricity don't mix. I'm just going to carry on and not put any more water in it and see what happens. If I die, then eh.
Anyone else think I explained that terribly? It's because I did, but you know, Google bias binding. Probably more helpful than I will ever be. This is just a way to finish the edges of the corset without doing a facing, and bindings can look cool if they put them in another colour. So now that I'm happy with the shape of my corset, I'm cutting off all the extra seam allowance on the top and the bottom. Now this is very scary, so you want to make sure you're 100% certain that it doesn't need to be lower, because you can't go back, but it needs to be done. Otherwise, you wouldn't have a corset, you just have a bleh.
This is now an unboxing video.
No, you don't.
Hello! What you doing in the box? Okay, good night.
And now to pin on the binding. Basically, you put the edge of the seam allowance against the edge of the corset and you pin it, so then when it wraps around, it looks normal. It's very hard to explain. You kind of have to see it to do it, so I suggest practicing it first before you sew on, because it could go terribly wrong. So I'm just pinning it, and then I'm going to sew across the line we just folded and pressed with our iron, so we don't need any chalk. See, I'm thinking ahead, this is very good. And then you fold it under and slip stitch on the other side. And then you do the whole thing again on the top half. See, it's not that complicated when you think about it, because you've got to do it twice. So if it goes wrong on the bottom, you've got the practice, so it goes right on the top. See, I'm thinking this through. The top's the bit that's visible.
What you looking at? Of course, as soon as I turn my camera on, you go back to sleep. Of course.
So here's me machine sewing down the first edge of the binding and realising that the bit of the corset doesn't fit under the machine, so I'm doing it back to front. So let's just go around the other way, shall we? Be a lot easier. Also, my machine sounds super cute sped up. Listen. Now, as I don't have a large industrial eyelet punch, I thought, this one in Home Bargains, cheap. These eyelets on Amazon, cheap. I'll buy them, I'll do it, it will work perfectly. These are the black eyelets I decided to use to go with the thing, and the hole punch couldn't even punch a hole in some polycotton. So how was it going to punch through 4 layers of coutil? It didn't work, it was terrible. So I tried using a hole puncher on some test fabric. It punched a hole, but then when I tried to punch the eyelets, the hole was just too big and the eyelet fell out with like the slightest bit of irritation. So that didn't work. And then I tested the eyelets that came with the kit and they looked alright and they were more sturdy, but they were really sharp and broken on the outside, and that's just not good and not safe. The other ones, however, worked when I stabbed it with my snips and widened the hole that way. They weren't perfect, but they would do. They didn't look the most pretty, but they stood up to some stress, and it was the best I was going to get.
Okay, so I've put all the eyelets in. I used black ones. It was a struggle, but I finally got them in. That's what they look like on the other side. They don't look too pretty on the other side, but this bit's not reversible, so that's fine. So that means the corset is done for now. The only other thing I'm going to do to it is put the crissy crossy bit that Aurora has, and I'm going to make it detachable. I don't know how I'm going to do that. I might put poppers on the back. I don't know if that'll be too uncomfortable, so I'll have to decide that later. But now I think I'm going to move on to making the dress, or more importantly the shirt part of the dress, because I was going to do it as a top and a skirt, but I'm thinking might just do it as one dress. So I'm going to go draft the pattern for that now. So here's the basic block again. If you're wondering why it's so horrifically smudged, it's because I drew it with a watercolour pencil instead of a coloured pencil, and my cat walked all over it. And it had been raining outside. So that's why it's all a bit smudgy, but it's fine because I can still read it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to trace this side and this side onto some baking paper because I don't have pattern paper. Ignore my brother. And then I'm going to adapt it for the shirt. Okay, so this is the front side, and what I'm going to have to do is lower the neck hole, the neckline, lower the neckline, lower the armhole, because on basic blocks the armhole is always really tight and I want Freddie to be able to move her arms. So I'm going to lower it quite a bit, I think, just to be safe, because there's going to be a sleeve and it's a puffy pirate shirt, so it won't look odd no matter what. And I'm going to close the dart, which means opening up at the bottom, but that'll be fine because it's being gathered in, so quite nice. I haven't drawn the middle darts because I didn't need it for the corset pattern, and it's a puffy pirate shirt, so I wouldn't need it. And it's been corseted in anyway. And then I'm going to keep it on the waistline. I'm going to cut it off the waistline because we want it to be hidden by the corset, and the corset cuts off about here. And then I shall get back to you and show you what I've done. So this is what I ended up with. I may take in the side seam a bit if I put it on the mannequin just to see what it's like, because I imagine it'll be very baggy at the front and not very baggy at the back, but we shall see, I guess. So there's that one. The back shouldn't need much taking in except taking the armhole down the same amount. So I'm going to quickly do that and then cut out the fabric. Oh, also I've got to make a sleeve pattern. Probably should do that first. So this is the back piece. What I've done is I've moved the armhole down to match the other one, and I've moved the shoulder line across to match the other one. I think that's it. I might take it out a bit at the side just so it's not super tight at the back and baggy at the front, but I'll see when I put it on a mannequin because I've got seam allowance, and I'll see how that goes. Maybe take a bit out of that and put it on that. I'm not sure. So that's that. I'm going to make a sleeve pattern now. So here's the sleeve pattern. Here's the head of the sleeve. The front dips down lower than the back because sleeve. I'm doing it on wrapping paper, and then at the end I've widened it out to make more of a bell sleeve, bishop sleeve. I don't know. But I was gonna pull it apart at the top to make a gathered sleeve head and then at the bottom, but I checked the Ariel pictures and it's not gathered at the top. So I'm not going to do that, and then I thought instead of cutting it all up I'll just draw it out. So that's that. I'm going to cut this out and then cut it out the fabric. Where did you come from? Hey? Are you in our summer house? I know. Do you want to go back outside? I had to go buy a bit more fabric because I underestimated the size of the sleeve. So this is the top piece pinned together. I think I'm going to make a few small changes, but other than that I think it fits pretty well. I adjusted the mannequin to roughly Freddie's size because it's a mannequin, so it's not going to be perfect. I'll show you what I'm going to change. Now the neckline's looking a little bit pointy, so I think I'm going to round it out. But also I think it's a bit too high, so I might make it a bit lower. So I might round that out. Also, it looks like the sleeve is coming too far in, which I have a problem with most of my patterns actually, so I might take the sleeve down there. The sleeve looks good, but obviously I haven't gathered the bottom because it's not sewn, it's only pinned, so I'm going to assume that's alright. And because I'm taking this in here, the sleeve might change a bit, but I'm hoping if it's too big I can just gather it a little bit at the top to give like a little tiny poof, and if it's too small I can just use some seam allowance. So that's what I'm going to do with that. I can very much tell that there's supposed to be darts here, but that's fine because it's going to be under the corset and you won't see. Oh, that's a good idea. I'll put the corset on the mannequin and then I can see where to put the neckline. Just realised I don't actually have any corset lace for this, so I quickly tied the top with whatever this is, trim. But I should probably get shoelaces? I don't know, something like that. But let's have a look at the front. So, in the pictures it comes down quite low, so I reckon there will be right. Yeah, I'm thinking just a bit rounder. There. The corset's very well shaped actually. Yeah. That'd be that then. It's all been stitched. Well, I stitched the side seams and the shoulder seams. Left it open at the back. Now I'm going to press my seams open on the iron. I've stitched the sleeve. I'm going to press that open into the armhole. Ta-da! Thank you for watching this video. Can't dance, don't know why I tried. The wind is so loud today. Can you not? The one time I try and do something productive.